The Roman Empire stood at the height of its earthly glory. Marble temples glittered beneath the Mediterranean sun. Senators draped in purple robes debated beneath towering columns, while victorious generals marched through crowded streets amid cheers and clouds of incense. To many, Rome seemed eternal, an empire whose power could never be challenged. Yet beneath that magnificent facade, another world existed, hidden below the city's stone avenues, beyond the reach of imperial banners and pagan ceremonies. Narrow tunnels carved into volcanic rock sheltered a growing community whose greatest weapon was not the sword, but faith. In the silence of the catacombs, Christians gathered by torchlight, praying to a king whom no emperor could overthrow. Among those secret believers was a young woman no one would ever have suspected. Camilla had been born into one of Rome's most distinguished aristocratic families. Her father enjoyed influence within the imperial administration, while her relatives entertained senators, magistrates, military commanders, and wealthy merchants beneath ceilings decorated with gold leaf and colorful frescoes. Every aspect of her future had already been carefully arranged before she had even reached adulthood. Servants dressed her in garments woven from the finest silk imported from the East. Jewels adorned her neck and wrists. Tutors instructed her in philosophy, poetry, rhetoric, music, and the customs expected of noble Roman women. To every observer, she represented the very image of privilege, but appearances concealed a dangerous secret. Every evening after the palace had fallen silent and servants retired to their quarters, Camilla quietly removed the expensive jewelry that symbolized her family's status. She exchanged embroidered robes for a simple cloak whose dark fabric blended with the night. Around her neck, hidden beneath every luxurious garment she wore during the day, rested a plain iron cross. It was neither elegant nor valuable. It possessed no precious stones and carried no artistic beauty. Yet to Camilla, it was worth infinitely more than all the treasures stored inside her family's estate. She believed it represented her true allegiance. Had you ever heard of Saint Camilla before today? Have you or anyone you know ever received a blessing, a miracle, or the intercession of Saint Camilla? Write it down in the comments below. I read every single one of your comments, and I'll leave a heart on yours. If this story warms your heart, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family so they can strengthen their faith too. The saints were forgotten once, and together we will never let that happen again. Guided only by moonlight, she slipped through narrow streets toward the outskirts of Rome, where trusted Christians waited in silence. They knew every hidden entrance leading into the underground catacombs, vast labyrinths that served not only as burial places for believers, but also as sanctuaries where scripture was read, hymns were whispered, and the Eucharist was celebrated beyond the eyes of imperial authorities. Every journey carried enormous risk. If discovered, she would not simply embarrass her noble family. Roman officials increasingly viewed Christianity with suspicion, believing its refusal to honor the traditional gods threatened both religious unity and political stability. Secret gatherings could easily be interpreted as acts of rebellion against the empire itself. Still, Camilla never stopped descending into the darkness. There, among rough stone walls lined with the resting places of martyrs, she found a peace no banquet had ever offered. The contrast overwhelmed her. Above ground, laughter echoed through halls filled with wine, music, and political ambition. Below ground, flickering oil lamps illuminated faces worn by poverty, persecution, and hope. She watched widows comforting orphans, former soldiers prayed beside slaves, merchants knelt next to laborers. In those hidden chambers, wealth no longer determined a person's value. Faith did. The elderly bishop, who often led the prayers, reminded the small congregation of Christ's own words about storing treasures in heaven rather than on earth. Every sentence pierced Camilla's heart more deeply than the speeches of Rome's greatest philosophers. Gradually, an extraordinary conviction grew within her. She no longer desired the future everyone else expected. Instead of becoming the influential wife of a Roman statesman, she longed to dedicate her entire life to Christ. One evening, deep inside the catacombs, surrounded by fellow believers and the tombs of those who had died for their faith, Camilla quietly pronounced a private vow. She would remain forever consecrated to Jesus. No earthly marriage, No political alliance, no imperial ambition, only complete devotion to the one she believed had conquered death itself. Few people knew of that promise. But heaven, she believed, had heard every word. For several months her secret remained carefully hidden. During the day, she fulfilled every social obligation expected of a young noblewoman. She attended banquets, greeted visiting officials with courtesy, and maintained the graceful composure admired throughout Roman society. At night, however, she became someone entirely different. She visited imprisoned Christians. She secretly distributed food, clothing, and medicine to families whose loved ones had been arrested. She memorized passages from the Gospels, because written copies remained rare and dangerous to possess. The double life demanded extraordinary discipline. Each smile she offered at court concealed prayers whispered only hours earlier beneath the earth. Each jeweled necklace hid the small iron cross resting against her heart. But secrets rarely remain hidden forever inside imperial households. Eventually, her parents announced what they believed would become the crowning achievement of their family's political future. Camilla was to marry a respected Roman tribune whose military victories had earned him prestige throughout the province. The marriage would strengthen alliances between two powerful families and guarantee influence for generations to come. Preparations began immediately. Tailors designed magnificent wedding garments. Goldsmiths crafted elaborate ornaments. Guests of the highest rank received invitations. The city anticipated a celebration worthy of Rome's elite. Camilla remained strangely calm. She understood what her decision would cost. On the appointed day, surrounded by magistrates, soldiers, priests of the Roman religion, and members of the aristocracy, she finally spoke. Her voice was steady, respectful, unshaken. She declared that she could not marry because she had already dedicated her life entirely to Jesus Christ. The words struck the gathering with shocking force. Silence spread through the hall. Some guests believed they had misunderstood. Others stared in disbelief. Her father turned pale with humiliation. The tribune's expression shifted from confusion to fury. Within Roman culture, marriage was far more than a private relationship. It represented family honor, political loyalty, and social stability. To reject such an arrangement publicly was viewed as an insult of the highest order, but to reject it because of allegiance to the forbidden Christian faith transformed personal defiance into something far more dangerous. Whispers swept through the assembled nobles. She has become one of them, a follower of the Galilean. She has betrayed Rome. Before long, the matter reached the attention of provincial authorities. The governor ordered that Camilla be brought before the tribunal. Crowds gathered to witness the interrogation of the young aristocrat, whose astonishing decision had become the newest scandal within the city. Standing before judges adorned with symbols of imperial authority, Camilla appeared remarkably composed, despite knowing that countless Christians had entered similar courtrooms and never returned alive. At the center of the tribunal stood an altar, prepared for a simple act. Only a single grain of incense needed to be offered before the image of Jupiter and in honor of the emperor. No lengthy ceremony, no complicated ritual, just one symbolic gesture. Roman officials frequently regarded this small act as proof of political loyalty rather than a denial of personal belief. The governor studied her carefully before speaking. "You were born into privilege," he said. "You have wealth, education, influence, and every opportunity Rome can offer. Do not throw your life away over stubborn superstition. Burn the incense, honor the gods, and return home." The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed upon the young woman. Slowly, Camilla stepped forward. The guards relaxed, believing she had finally chosen wisdom over death. She approached the altar without hesitation. For one brief moment, it seemed the entire conflict had come to an end. Then, instead of taking the incense, she looked directly at the pagan shrine. With calm determination, she swept the incense onto the stone floor before the assembled court. The fragrant grains scattered across the pavement. Gasps erupted throughout the chamber. According to later Christian tradition, Camilla declared that no earthly power deserved the worship owed to God alone, openly rejecting the idols before her, despite knowing the consequences such words would bring. The governor's face hardened with rage. Mercy vanished from the proceedings. The sentence would no longer be intended merely to frighten her into submission. It would become an example, an unforgettable warning to every Christian still hiding beneath the streets of Rome. The dungeon of beasts and the cruelty of the torturers. The governor had expected only one thing from the trial: fear. He believed that once Camilla stood before the instruments of Roman justice, once she heard the screams echoing from the torture chambers beneath the fortress, the young noblewoman would abandon the faith that had brought disgrace upon her influential family. Instead, every punishment seemed only to strengthen the serenity reflected in her face. Her refusal to offer incense had spread rapidly through the city. Merchants whispered about the courageous aristocrat who had openly challenged the authority of Rome. Soldiers mocked her determination, convinced that no human being could withstand what awaited beneath the prison. The governor could not afford another public confrontation. If the crowds continued hearing about her courage instead of her suffering, sympathy for the Christians might grow stronger, so he ordered that she disappear, not into an ordinary prison, but into the darkest place beneath the Roman fortress. The underground cells had earned a terrible reputation. Even hardened criminals dreaded being sent there. Sunlight never entered its narrow corridors. Moisture dripped endlessly from cracked stone ceilings, forming stagnant pools that carried the smell of decay. Chains scraped against the walls whenever prisoners shifted in exhaustion. The air itself seemed heavy with despair. Murderers, thieves, political enemies, and condemned slaves occupied neighboring cells. Some had lost all sense of time. Others had forgotten their own names after years of isolation. Camilla was pushed through rusted iron gates until she reached the deepest chamber. According to ancient Christian tradition, the authorities intended not only to imprison her, but to expose her to violent inmates and dangerous animals that had been kept for executions and public spectacles. The guards laughed as they forced her inside. One of them held up a torch, allowing its trembling light to reveal several large animals moving slowly in the darkness. Their eyes reflected the firelight with an unsettling glow. "Your God has abandoned you," another guard sneered before slamming the heavy door shut. Silence followed. Only the distant dripping of water remained. The prisoners watched her carefully. They expected panic. Instead, Camilla quietly knelt upon the cold stone floor. Her clothes were stained from previous abuse, her wrists bruised by heavy chains, yet her lips moved in silent prayer. Hours passed. The darkness deepened. Some prisoners later recalled that she began speaking gently to those around her, not about escaping their chains, nor about revenge against Rome, but about forgiveness, hope, and eternal life. She spoke of Christ as someone who had also suffered injustice, someone who had been mocked, beaten, and condemned despite his innocence. One by one, the hardened expressions around her began to soften. Men whose lives had been defined by violence listened without interrupting. One confessed that he had not prayed since childhood. Another admitted that he could no longer remember the face of his own mother. Camilla listened to each story without judgment. She reminded them that no prison wall could separate a repentant soul from God's mercy. According to later accounts preserved in Christian tradition, something extraordinary happened before dawn. When the guards returned expecting to discover chaos and bloodshed, they froze. The prisoners who had been notorious for brutality were no longer shouting curses. Several were kneeling in silence. Others wept openly. The animals that had terrified generations of inmates lay quietly around Camilla, showing no sign of aggression. To the guards, the sight seemed impossible. The governor dismissed the reports as superstition. He refused to believe that a young Christian woman could possess such influence. "If the darkness cannot break her," he declared, "pain will." The order was given immediately. Camilla was dragged from the dungeon into the torture chamber. The room had been designed for one purpose alone: breaking human bodies. Iron hooks hung from the walls beside chains blackened by age. Braziers filled with burning charcoal illuminated racks, wheels, and instruments, carefully crafted to prolong agony, rather than bring swift death. Experienced executioners stood waiting. These men had extracted confessions from rebels, spies, and soldiers alike. They viewed suffering as a profession. To them, every body eventually surrendered. Camilla was fastened onto the equuleus, a Roman stretching rack used to pull joints beyond their natural limits. Leather straps secured her wrists and ankles. The chief executioner approached the governor one final time. "One command from you," he said, "and she may still live." The governor nodded toward Camilla. Ask her once. The executioner leaned close. Offer the incense, he whispered. 1 grain, that is all. She slowly lifted her eyes. My life belongs to Christ. Nothing more, nothing less. The governor lowered his hand. The wheels began to turn. At first the movement appeared almost gentle. Then the ropes tightened. Camilla's arms stretched farther apart, her shoulders strained under increasing tension. The executioners continued turning the mechanisms with practiced precision. Every rotation forced her body farther than nature had intended. Muscles trembled violently, ligaments strained under unbearable pressure. Witnesses described hearing the disturbing sounds of joints shifting as the rack continued its relentless work. The governor watched carefully. Most victims screamed long before reaching this point. Many begged for mercy. Others confessed to crimes they had never committed simply to end the torture. Camilla remained astonishingly composed. Her breathing became heavier. Sweat gathered across her forehead. Yet no cry escaped her lips. Those standing nearby later claimed they could hear her softly reciting words of prayer between each painful breath. The governor's frustration deepened. He ordered the torture intensified. The executioners obeyed. The rack stretched farther still. Every movement threatened permanent injury. Even some soldiers looked away, not because they questioned the punishment, but because they had rarely witnessed anyone endure such suffering without pleading for relief. When the governor realized the rack had failed to destroy her resolve, he signaled for another instrument. Large iron hooks were brought forward. Their sharpened ends glimmered beneath the torchlight. According to traditional accounts of her martyrdom, the executioners used these hooks to tear repeatedly at the flesh along her sides and back. Each movement inflicted devastating wounds. Blood stained the stone beneath her. The chamber echoed with the scraping of iron against flesh. Several spectators expected her consciousness to fade within moments, yet something about her expression unsettled everyone present. Though weakened by immense suffering, her face reflected neither hatred nor despair. Instead, witnesses described an extraordinary calm. Some believed she had entered a profound state of prayer. Others whispered that she seemed to be looking beyond the torture chamber itself, as though her attention rested upon something invisible to everyone else. One young soldier standing near the entrance lowered his spear. He had participated in countless executions. He had seen brave men lose courage. He had watched criminals curse the gods with their final breaths, but he had never seen anyone respond to agony with such quiet peace. The governor noticed the hesitation spreading among his own men. That disturbed him more than Camilla's endurance. Rome depended upon fear. Public punishments existed to demonstrate the irresistible power of the empire. Yet every moment Camilla remained faithful, transformed the spectacle into something entirely different. Instead of displaying Rome's strength, it revealed the limits of its cruelty. Instead of breaking one believer, it planted questions in the hearts of those ordered to destroy her. Furious, the governor rose from his seat. If her body refuses to surrender, he declared, then let every punishment Rome possesses be brought against her. The executioners stepped back only long enough to prepare the next ordeal, while the silence inside the chamber grew heavier than before, as if every soul present sensed that the conflict unfolding before them had become something far greater than a contest between a prisoner and an empire. The fire that turned back and the mystery after her death. By the time the governor issued his final decree, word of Camilla's unwavering faith had spread far beyond the prison walls. What had begun as a private trial had become the subject of whispered conversations throughout the city. Merchants repeated the story in crowded marketplaces. Servants carried fragments of the tale into aristocratic villas. Even soldiers assigned to the garrison quietly discussed the young noblewoman who had endured every punishment without renouncing Christ. The governor recognized the danger. Rome depended upon public displays of unquestioned authority. Executions were meant to extinguish hope, not inspire it. Yet every attempt to break Camilla's resolve had produced the opposite effect. Instead of becoming a warning against Christianity, she had become a symbol of courage. Determined to end the matter once and for all, the authorities ordered a public execution. At dawn, soldiers led Camilla through the city's streets toward the arena where countless prisoners had already met their deaths. The crowd gathered long before sunrise, filling every available space. Some had come seeking entertainment. Others expected to witness the final defeat of another Christian. Hidden among them were believers praying silently. No one spoke openly. To identify oneself as a follower of Christ could mean sharing Camilla's fate before the day was over. As the procession entered the arena, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Roman banners fluttered proudly above the stone walls. Priests of the traditional religion prepared ceremonial offerings. Military officers stood in polished armor, their helmets reflecting the morning light. At the center of the arena stood a wooden stake surrounded by an enormous pile of dry timber soaked with pitch and oil. The sentence had been carefully chosen. Fire was among the most terrifying forms of execution known in the ancient world. Beyond its physical agony, it carried powerful symbolism. The authorities believed that reducing a condemned body to ashes erased every possibility of honorable remembrance. Camilla walked toward the stake with remarkable composure. Her body still bore the visible marks of imprisonment and torture. Viases darkened her arms. Her garments were torn. Every movement revealed the pain left behind by the rack and the scourges. Yet witnesses later described that her expression remained peaceful. She looked neither defeated nor consumed by hatred. According to ancient Christian tradition, as the executioners bound her hands to the stake, she quietly lifted her eyes toward heaven and prayed, not for rescue, but for strength to remain faithful until the very end. The executioners finished stacking the wood around her feet. The governor rose before the assembled crowd. "In the name of Rome," he proclaimed, "let all who reject the gods behold the fate of those who oppose the empire." Torches were lowered. The dry wood caught almost immediately. Flames climbed rapidly around the base of the stake, sending thick smoke into the morning sky. The spectators leaned forward. Everyone expected the fire to rise straight toward its victim. According to later Christian tradition, something wholly unexpected occurred. Without warning, a powerful gust of wind swept across the arena. Dust spiraled through the air. The flames suddenly bent away from Camilla instead of surrounding her. Burning branches collapsed outward rather than inward. The fire that had been intended to consume the prisoner was said to have surged back toward portions of the execution platform, scattering soldiers and forcing many spectators to retreat in panic. Confusion spread instantly. Some shouted that the wind had changed. Others cried out that the gods themselves had become angry. Still others stood speechless, unable to explain what they believed they had witnessed. The governor, however, refused to allow uncertainty to overcome Roman authority. Whether miracle or coincidence, the execution had to end immediately. He barked a single order to the chief executioner: "No more delays." A veteran soldier stepped into the arena carrying a short Roman sword. Unlike the spectacle of fire, this method would leave nothing to chance. He approached Camilla with measured steps. For a brief moment, the arena fell completely silent. Even the frightened crowd stopped moving. According to the ancient tradition surrounding her martyrdom, Camilla whispered one final prayer, entrusting her soul to Christ before lowering her head. The executioner raised his sword. One swift stroke ended her earthly life. She was only 19 years old. The silence that followed seemed almost heavier than the noise that had filled the arena moments earlier. Those who had gathered expecting triumph instead found themselves staring at the lifeless body of a young woman whose courage had remained unshaken until her final breath. Among the traditions preserved by later generations of Christians is one especially enduring account. It was said that as her blood touched the ground, an unexpected fragrance filled the air. Instead of the metallic scent commonly associated with blood, witnesses described the delicate aroma of fresh roses spreading throughout the arena. Some believed it represented divine favor. Others dismissed it as imagination born from emotion. Whatever its explanation, the account endured for centuries within Christian devotion, becoming one of the most frequently repeated elements of Camilla's story. The governor quickly ordered the body removed. He feared that allowing Christians to gather publicly around the remains of the young martyr would only strengthen the movement he had hoped to suppress. Roman officials often denied honorable burials to executed Christians. Nevertheless, believers had become remarkably skilled at recovering the bodies of those who had died for their faith. That night, under the cover of darkness, a small group of Christians quietly made their way beyond the city's busiest streets. Moving cautiously to avoid patrols, they carried Camilla's body through hidden passages leading into the ancient catacombs beneath Rome. There, surrounded by the resting places of earlier martyrs, they prepared her burial with profound reverence. No elaborate monument marked the site. No marble statues proclaimed her name. Only prayer echoed through the underground chambers as fellow believers entrusted her body to the earth while holding firmly to their hope in the resurrection promised by Christ. As generations passed, the persecutions eventually came to an end. The Roman Empire itself changed dramatically, and Christianity emerged from the shadows of the catacombs into the light of public worship. Yet stories about Camilla continued to circulate among pilgrims. According to long-standing devotional tradition, visitors who descended into the dim corridors where she was believed to have been buried sometimes reported witnessing a gentle, mysterious radiance near her resting place. They described not a dazzling light, but a soft glow that seemed to stand out against the darkness of the underground passages. Whether understood as a miraculous sign, a symbolic expression of faith, or a cherished legend passed from one generation to another, these accounts strengthened her reputation among Christians who sought courage during times of suffering. Her memory became associated with steadfastness in persecution, purity of conscience, and unwavering fidelity to Christ despite overwhelming earthly power. The empire that had condemned her eventually faded into history. Its governors disappeared. Its tribunals fell silent. Its arenas became ruins visited by later generations. Yet the story of the young woman who chose conviction over privilege continued to be told wherever Christians remembered the courage of the early martyrs, preserving her name as an enduring witness to faith in an age defined by fear.